February 26, 1945, Iwo Jima. A 19-year-old Marine watched a bazooka man crumple into the volcanic ash. The weapon lay there beside the body, a 54-inch tube that required 2 trained men to operate. Private First Class Douglas Jacobson dropped his rifle, grabbed the bazooka and stood up. Over the next 30 minutes he would use that clumsy 2-man weapon completely alone to kill 75 Japanese soldiers. This is the story of the M1A1 Bazooka, the weapon the Army designed for 2-man teams, the weapon Marines cursed for its awkward length and temperamental electronics, the weapon that should have been useless in one man's hands. And this is the story of a teenage lifeguard from Long Island who made it the deadliest thing on the most contested hill in the Pacific. But first, you need to understand what he was fighting against. To understand why Jacobson's 30-minute rampage mattered, you have to understand what the Japanese had built on Iwo Jima. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had transformed the island into the most formidable defensive position American forces had ever encountered. He broke with traditional Japanese doctrine in ways that would cost thousands of American lives. There would be no banzai charges. Kuribayashi explicitly forbade them as an unnecessary waste of his men's lives. Instead, he built 18 kilometers of tunnels connecting fortified positions, some chambers reaching 75 feet underground, capable of sheltering 300 men each. He constructed 642 concrete pillboxes and blockhouses with walls up to 4 feet thick. He distributed what he called courageous battle vows to every soldier under his command. One of them read, "We shall not die until we have killed 10 of the enemy." American planners expected to capture Iwo Jima in 5 days. Kuribayashi held for 36. Hill 382 sat at the center of this nightmare. The Marines called it the meat grinder, and the name was earned. At 382 feet, it was the second highest point on the island, and Kuribayashi had hollowed it out and rebuilt it with interlocking concrete gun housings. Each position was protected by as many as 10 supporting machine gun emplacements. The terrain was a maze of volcanic ridges and draws that made pre-invasion maps worthless. By February 26, 1945, 7 days after the famous flag raising on Mount Suribachi, the 4th Marine Division had been grinding against this position for days. Company Y of the 3rd Battalion, 23rd Marines, was pinned down by devastating crossfire. In the same 30 minutes that Jacobson would conduct his assault, his company suffered 17 killed and 26 wounded. The Japanese had designed their defences to make individual heroism meaningless. Every position covered another position, every bunker supported every other bunker. No single man could break such a system. That was the theory. Jacobson had not read the theory. The weapon Jacobson grabbed from his fallen comrade was never meant to be fired alone. The 2.36-inch rocket launcher M1A1 stretched 54.5 inches long and weighed over 13 pounds unloaded. The Army had designed it as a crew-served weapon for good reason, and that reason became obvious the moment you tried to load it. The loading procedure demanded choreographed teamwork between gunner and loader. First, the gunner assumed firing position with the launcher balanced on his shoulder. The loader then inserted the 3.5-pound rocket into the breech from the rear. But inserting the rocket was only the beginning. The loader had to remove the arming pin, then unfurl a coiled wire from the rocket's fin assembly and wrap it around a contact spring on the launcher body. This completed the electrical firing circuit. Only after the loader verified the connection and cleared the backblast danger zone, roughly 50 feet behind the weapon, could the gunner pull the trigger. General George Patton himself had acknowledged the weapon's limitations in a letter the previous year. The purpose of the bazooka, he wrote, is not to hunt tanks offensively, but to be used as a last resort in keeping tanks from overrunning infantry. To ensure this, the range should be held to around 30 yards. 30 yards, close enough to see the rivets on a tank's hull. The Pacific Theatre compounded every problem. Heat, humidity, and salt air plagued the electrical system. Marines who pulled the trigger often experienced short circuits and misfires. Early rockets stuck in launch tubes, leaving soldiers with live bombs on their shoulders. The official War Department technical manual conceded that in emergencies a bazooka may be operated by one man. But the physical reality made this nearly impossible under fire. You had to hold a 54-inch tube steady on your shoulder while simultaneously reaching behind you to load a rocket, make delicate electrical connections, clear your own backblast area, aim and fire, then repeat. The Germans had solved this problem differently. Their disposable anti-tank weapon weighed only 7 pounds, required one operator, and demanded minimal training. American paratroopers who captured these weapons in Europe preferred them to their own bazookas. The American design philosophy had prioritized reusability and range over simplicity. In the volcanic chaos of Iwo Jima, where engagement distances collapsed to feet rather than yards, that philosophy became a liability. Jacobson had never trained specifically as a bazooka operator. He was a rifleman, known in his unit for his skill with the Browning automatic rifle. His training had prepared him to fire from stable positions with proper support. Nothing had prepared him for what he was about to improvise. Yet something in the weapon's fundamental simplicity, a tube that directed explosive force at a target, transcended its designed limitations. In the hands of someone who simply refused to acknowledge those limitations, even a clumsy weapon could become something terrifying. The question was whether one man could fire it fast enough and accurately enough to matter. What followed was systematic destruction on a scale that defied the weapon's design limitations. Jacobson started with his own platoon sector. He destroyed a 20mm anti-aircraft gun that the Japanese had depressed for ground fire and killed its crew. He neutralized 2 machine gun positions. He attacked a large blockhouse and silenced it completely. He killed the 5-man crew of a pillbox, then detonated the installation with demolition charges he had grabbed along with the bazooka. He wiped out an earth-covered rifle emplacement, then he kept going. Confronted by a cluster of emplacements forming the enemy's defensive perimeter, Jacobson advanced directly into the fire. He reduced 6 positions to rubble and killed 10 more of the enemy, opening a breach that allowed American forces to occupy the strongpoint. A rational man would have stopped there. Jacobson volunteered to help an adjacent assault company that was also pinned down. If you're finding this interesting, consider subscribing. It helps the channel and means you won't miss the next one. Now, back to Hill 382. Jacobson neutralized another pillbox holding up the neighboring company's advance. Then he spotted a Japanese tank pouring machine gun fire into an American tank. The Japanese had buried their tanks up to the turrets across Iwo Jima, using them as fixed fortifications while retaining their firepower. Jacobson opened fire and smashed the enemy tank's gun turret. His assault culminated in a single-handed attack on yet another blockhouse. He only stopped when he ran out of ammunition. His company commander had watched the entire action through binoculars from a nearby hill. This eyewitness testimony would prove crucial later, but in the moment, the commander simply watched a 19-year-old former lifeguard running from position to position like a man possessed. One historian would later describe him as moving like a man berserk. Jacobson's own explanation offered no heroics. "I do not know how I did it," he said afterward. "I had one thing in mind, getting off that hill." His widow would later add context. "Your adrenaline is pumping so hard," she explained. "It is kill or be killed, so you charge ahead and do what you have to do." In 30 minutes, operating a weapon designed for 2, Jacobson had destroyed 16 fortified positions and killed approximately 75 Japanese soldiers. That worked out to roughly 2.5 kills per minute. But there was something his Medal of Honor citation would never mention. The records do not tell us how many times Jacobson's bazooka misfired. They do not tell us how many rockets failed to arm, how many electrical connections came loose, how many shots went wide because he was loading and aiming simultaneously while under fire. The M1A1's reliability problems were well documented, and Jacobson was using the weapon in exactly the conditions that maximized those problems. Heat, volcanic dust, physical stress, no loader to verify connections. We know he destroyed 16 positions. We do not know how many attempts that required. This gap in the record might seem like a limitation. It is actually evidence of something remarkable. The bazooka's unreliability meant Jacobson had to expose himself to enemy fire again and again, not just 16 times, but potentially dozens of times, repositioning after misfires, clearing jammed rockets, making electrical connections while machine gun rounds kicked up volcanic ash around him. Every malfunction extended his time in the kill zone. The weapon's clumsiness did not prevent his rampage. It meant his rampage required even more sustained courage than the citation suggests. A reliable weapon would have let him finish faster. The bazooka he actually carried forced him to fight longer, stay exposed longer, and survive longer than any reasonable calculation would predict. The clumsy weapon made the man who wielded it even more extraordinary. On October 5, 1945, Corporal Douglas Jacobson received an engraved invitation to appear at the White House in Marine dress uniform. President Harry Truman presented him the Medal of Honor on the White House lawn, alongside 13 other recipients. The citation concluded that by his dauntless skill and valor, Private First Class Jacobson destroyed a total of 16 enemy positions and annihilated approximately 75 Japanese, thereby contributing essentially to the success of his division's operations against this fanatically defended outpost of the Japanese Empire. He was 20 years old. Jacobson was discharged in December 1945. 4 months later, he re-enlisted. He would serve 24 more years, including tours in China and Vietnam, retiring as a major in 1967. Near the end of his career, his commanding officer informed him of something unusual. Jacobson was one of the only officers in the Marine Corps without a high school diploma. He had enlisted at 17 before graduating. 2 captains helped him study, and at age 41, one of America's most decorated warriors finally earned his high school equivalency certificate. There were those who resented his medal. His widow later revealed that higher-ranking officers, jealous of the recognition given to an enlisted man, tried to have his Medal of Honor revoked. They failed. The company commander's binocular witness testimony was unimpeachable. Jacobson sold real estate in New Jersey after retiring. He rarely talked about the war unless asked. At the 40th anniversary commemoration at Golden Gate National Cemetery in 1985, he offered a rare reflection. Those were the days when men were men and proud of it, he said. They never asked if this island was needed or if the war was just. When they were called to do their duty, they stood up and were counted. He died on August 20th, 2000 in Port Charlotte, Florida. He's buried at Arlington National Cemetery. The Douglas T. Jacobson State Veterans Nursing Home in Port Charlotte bears his name. February 26, 1945, Iwo Jima. A 19-year-old Marine watched a bazooka man fall. The weapon lay there in the volcanic ash, 54 inches of awkward, temperamental two-man machinery. Douglas Jacobson picked it up anyway, and for 30 minutes, on the deadliest hill in the Pacific, one teenage lifeguard from Long Island proved that sometimes the clumsiest weapon in the wrong hands becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. Sometimes it is not about the tool. It is about who refuses to put it down. I would love to hear your thoughts. Jacobson is far less famous than John Bassaloon or Tony Stein, despite arguably accomplishing more in a single action. Do you think the lack of a dramatic death or a custom weapon explains why he has been forgotten? Or is there something else that determines which heroes